They were barely 6. Two little girls, barefoot and trembling, left to freeze on the edge of a snow-covered road. No coats, no food, no mother. Just a whisper. He took Mommy. And that whisper lit a fire. A battle-hardened cop and his scarred K-9 partner followed the trail into a frozen nightmare. What they found will break your heart, and then heal it. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far their story reaches. And if you believe in second chances, if you believe in the quiet heroism of a dog's heart, hit that subscribe button. Because this one will stay with you forever. The wind clawed its way through the Carolina pines, howling like something wounded. It was late January in Asheville, North Carolina. Usually sleepy and gray, but tonight, a vicious cold front had slammed into the Blue Ridge Mountains, laying down thick sheets of ice and choking the narrow back roads with flurries sharp enough to sting skin. County Road 47, a forgotten service route snaking along the edge of the forest, was nearly invisible beneath layers of snow and drifting fog. Most sane people had gone to bed hours ago. Officer Daniel Foster was not most people. Daniel sat hunched behind the wheel of his patrol SUV, shoulders square beneath his heavy winter jacket. At 39, he had the look of someone who had spent too many years carrying weight too heavy for one man. His sandy brown hair, cropped short, bore traces of gray at the temples. A rough stubble lined his sharp jaw, and his hazel eyes flicked between the road and the whiteout conditions beyond with weary precision. A faint scar above his right eyebrow split his skin like an old fault line, a remnant from a roadside bomb in Fallujah he didn't talk about. Daniel didn't talk about much, not since Marissa died. That silence clung to him like his shadow. Beside him, coiled like a sentinel, was Coda, a German shepherd unlike any Daniel had worked with. 7 years old and built lean and sinewy, Coda's black and tan coat was thick and brushed with frost around the muzzle. One ear stood rigid, the other drooped slightly, a permanent mark from a training accident when he was a pup. A faint, almost invisible scar traced the ribs on his right side, earned during a building collapse 3 winters ago. That was also the day Daniel named him. Coda, short for Dakota, had been the name Daniel and Marissa had planned for their unborn son. When the building crumbled and Daniel found the dog buried under wood and blood but still breathing, something broke open in him. He knelt in the snow, whispered, "You live for him," and named him then and there. Since that moment, they had been inseparable. The SUV's heater hummed low, struggling against the cold that tried to claw in from outside. Suddenly, Coda lifted his head. His ears twitched, nose sniffed sharply. Then came a low, rumbling growl that Daniel hadn't heard in months. One born, not from fear, but instinct. Danger. Something was wrong. Daniel's hand immediately went to the gear shift. He slowed the SUV, headlights slicing through the curtain of snow ahead. That's when he saw them. 2 small figures on the side of the road, barefoot, shivering, clutching each other like lifelines. He blinked, unsure if his mind was playing tricks, but Coda's bark confirmed the truth. Daniel pulled over, tires skidding slightly on the ice. He grabbed his flashlight, heart hammering in his chest. The door groaned open, and the cold bit into him like teeth. Coda leapt out first, his paws sinking into the powder. Daniel followed, squinting into the swirling white. The girls didn't run. They just stood there, locked in place like statues carved from frost. One had a head slightly higher than the other. Both were gaunt, with pale cheeks burned raw by the wind, and thin, soaking wet red wool dresses clinging to their knees. Their long blonde hair was a mess of tangles and ice. One clutched something tightly to her chest, a wrinkled sheet of paper. Daniel dropped to one knee in front of them, lowering his flashlight. "Hey there," he said gently, voice steady despite the storm around them. "My name's Daniel. I'm a police officer. Are you hurt?" The taller girl's lips trembled. Her eyes were impossibly wide, and her voice came out in a whisper. "He took Mommy. Into the woods." Daniel felt the world narrow into a tunnel. "Who took her?" he asked softly. The second girl, quieter, barely audible over the wind, added, "He said, 'No one will find her. Not ever.'" Daniel reached out slowly. "Okay, you're safe now. Can you tell me your names?" The taller one swallowed. "I'm Clara. This is my sister, Chloe." He noticed then Chloe wasn't just trembling from cold. Her gaze was fixed somewhere far away, dissociating. Coda approached slowly, lowering his head, and did something Daniel didn't expect. He gently nudged Chloe's hand with his nose and licked her fingertips. She blinked, startled at first, then seemed to wake up. She looked down at the dog, her lips parting slightly. Clara looked at Coda. "He's not mean." "No," Daniel said. "He's not. He's here to protect people. Like you." Clara finally loosened her grip and held up the crumpled page. Daniel took it carefully. It was a drawing. 3 stick figures, 2 children and a woman. The man's face was scribbled out with such ferocity that the paper had torn. His stomach turned. He didn't ask anything more right then. He could see Chloe was close to unconsciousness. He scooped one girl into each arm, cradling them against his chest. They were feather-light. Coda moved ahead, ears twitching as if every sound mattered. Inside the SUV, he wrapped them in his patrol jacket and turned the heat up to max. Coda lay across the floor in front of the back seat, placing his chin on the edge near Chloe's bootless feet. She didn't flinch. In fact, she reached out, fingers brushing the fur behind his ear. As the vehicle rumbled back onto the road, Daniel picked up his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Foster. I've got 2 juvenile females found alone on County 47 near mile marker 22, approximately 6 years old, signs of exposure, possible abduction involving their mother, requesting backup and medical immediately." Coda's eyes never left the girls. Snowflakes melted into the lines of his scar as his breath steamed in the warm air. His tail thumped once, soft, as if he already knew what they would face next. Daniel glanced in the mirror. Chloe was staring at the dog now, not with fear, but with something like belief. The fluorescent lights in the pediatric wing of the Asheville Police Department flickered slightly, casting a pale blue glow over the narrow hallway. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee. Snow continued to drift down outside in thick, languid flakes, muting the world beyond the frosted windows. Inside, it was quiet, too quiet. But the silence wasn't peace. It was the kind that made hearts ache and breath catch. In room 3B, the 2 little girls lay under heated emergency blankets, their tiny forms nearly lost within the folds. Clara had fallen asleep moments after the warmth wrapped around her. Her lips were still cracked, and her fingers curled instinctively into fists beneath the covers. Chloe, however, remained awake, her brown eyes open wide and glossy. She stared blankly at the ceiling, not blinking for long moments. A nurse named Marla Henson gently checked Chloe's pulse. Marla was in her early 50s, plump and motherly, with deep creases etched around her mouth that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. Her graying blonde hair was tied into a bun that had come slightly loose after hours on shift. She'd worked the night shift in Asheville for 15 years and had seen more trauma on small faces than she cared to admit. Still, there was something about these twins that made her stomach tighten. "It's frostbite on the toes," Marla said quietly, looking up at Officer Daniel Foster. "Not deep. We got to them in time, but their feet are swollen and we'll need to carefully rewarm them. Can't remove the shoes until the tissue loosens." Daniel stood beside the examination table, arms folded tightly across his chest, eyes shadowed and unmoving. Coda lay by the door like a statue, his nose pointed toward the girls, ears at half-mast, but alert. His thick fur still held clumps of melting snow, and his breath fogged the tile floor. He hadn't moved since they entered. "There's also bruising," Marla continued, her voice dropping. "Old ones, linear in pattern, most likely belt or stick. Ribs, arms, upper thighs. Someone's been hurting them for a while." Daniel swallowed, jaw tight. "Any idea how long?" Marla hesitated. "Hard to say exactly. Weeks, months maybe." She looked down at Chloe again and added softly, "The older one's dissociating, staring off. It's a response to chronic trauma. She's here, but not really." Chloe stirred then, just slightly, and her lips parted. The words came out barely audible. "Mommy said, if he gets too mad, find someone kind, someone who has a dog." Her voice cracked at the last word, then faded into nothing. Daniel crouched beside her. "You did exactly what she said, sweetheart," he murmured. "You found me, and you found Coda." Coda rose and slowly walked to the edge of the bed. Chloe's small fingers found his fur again, curling into the warmth just behind his ear. Her grip was so faint it might have been mistaken for a twitch, but Daniel saw it, and so did Coda. The dog pressed closer, laying his head gently on the mattress. From the doorway, another voice broke the tension. "Foster, you've got someone asking for you in the hall. Said she's from Child Services." Daniel looked up to see Officer Jaden Morris, a tall, wiry patrolman in his early 30s, with a clean-shaven face and a constant air of nervous energy. Jaden was new, only 7 months into the force, but reliable. He avoided eye contact with the girls, as if afraid their silence might spread to him. "Tell her I'll be right out," Daniel said. Jaden nodded and disappeared. Daniel gave Chloe's hand a final squeeze before standing. Coda remained where he was. Outside, Daniel found Vanessa Green waiting in the corridor. Vanessa was a striking woman in her early 40s, African-American, with dark eyes that missed nothing, and a wardrobe of pressed blouses and thick scarves. She was the regional supervisor for Child Protective Services, known for her relentless drive and quiet empathy. Her short-cropped hair was peppered with silver, and she carried a tablet tucked beneath her arm like a shield. "I came as soon as I got the call," she said. "Where are they?" "In there," Daniel nodded. "Room 3B, Chloe and Clara Carter." Vanessa glanced toward the door, her brows furrowing. "Carter," she muttered, scrolling through her tablet. "Amanda Carter. Filed a complaint last spring. Accused her live-in boyfriend Rick Dalton of physical and emotional abuse. Claimed he threatened the kids, but the case was dismissed. Lack of evidence." Daniel's throat tightened. She wasn't lying. Vanessa nodded slowly. "That's the thing. Most don't. I'll get started on temporary custody paperwork. They'll stay here until we can find the mother or determine next steps." "She's alive," Daniel said firmly. "They said he dragged her into the woods. He told them no one would find the body." "Then we find her," Vanessa replied, matching his tone. Inside the room, Chloe had finally drifted to sleep, her fingers still resting on Coda's thick fur. Marla gently draped a thermal blanket over the dog's back. He didn't flinch. Later that evening, Daniel sat at his desk, a folder open beside him. Inside were printouts past complaints, photographs, one grainy image of Amanda Carter with a bruised jaw and a baby carrier slung over her shoulder. That photo was from 6 years ago. The name Rick Dalton was stamped across multiple documents, each one screaming warning signs no one had answered. Coda lay beneath the desk, his ears twitching even in rest. The lights dimmed, and outside the station, the snow continued to fall. It blanketed everything: the trees, the rooftops, the sins people buried and hoped would stay hidden. But Daniel had learned something long ago, in war, in law enforcement, in life. Snow never truly covers blood, not forever. And somewhere out there, a woman named Amanda was bleeding into it. The next morning came cloaked in gray. A thick cloud layer flattened the sky, washing the world in a monochrome palette of slate and silver. Snow still fell lightly but steadily over Asheville, blanketing the station's rooftop and whispering against the windows like static. Inside, the heat hummed low, steady as a heartbeat. Officer Daniel Foster stood alone in the briefing room, a half-drunk mug of bitter coffee cooling in his hand, his eyes locked on the digital case file glowing from the screen before him. He had spent the night combing through records, his mind a storm of anger and urgency. Everything pointed back to one name: Rick Dalton. Daniel clicked open a folder labeled Carter Amanda, Prior Reports. The woman in the attached photos looked different than the one in the grainy complaint from a year ago. In a candid image clearly taken at a picnic, Amanda Carter smiled wearily at the camera. She was in her mid-30s, petite with dark brown hair tied back loosely, crow's feet hinting at a life spent worrying more than laughing. Her thin frame was curled protectively around 2 little girls, Clara and Chloe, still toddlers then. She wore a red plaid coat, and in her hand was a paper cup of coffee. The image was slightly creased and strangely sticky on one corner. Daniel reached toward the printer where he had gathered the original complaint files. Inside the pocket of a jacket recovered from Amanda's last known residence, officers had found something folded tightly into the lining, an old photo of Amanda and the girls. On the back was a message written in a hurried scrawl, barely legible. "If someone finds this, please don't leave my daughters behind." The ink had smeared in places, likely from moisture, but the desperation still bled through. Daniel took a breath, then tapped a few keys on his laptop. He opened the known offender database and typed, Rick Dalton. A mugshot filled the screen. The man's face was raw with tension even in a still image. He had the kind of gaunt, predatory look that made people instinctively step away. Early 40s, white male, 6'1", 180 pounds, a crooked nose from multiple breaks, thick eyebrows that seemed perpetually furrowed. But the most identifying feature was a jagged scar slicing down his left cheek, like a bolt of lightning caught mid-strike. That scar wasn't just cosmetic, it was a wound from a bar fight, the report said, one where Dalton nearly gouged out another man's eye over a spilled drink. Daniel exhaled sharply. He remembered that case. He hadn't been the lead, but he remembered seeing Dalton in holding. Something about the man had made his skin crawl even then. Rick's last known address was listed as a trailer on the edge of the township, but that had been vacated months ago. Several local reports noted sightings of him in the wooded hills to the northwest, just past where the twins had been found. The area was remote, service-dead, and thick with pine and frozen creek beds. Not somewhere you'd stumble across unless you meant to. Daniel left the briefing room and walked down the hallway. Coda padded behind him without a sound, the faint jingle of his collar the only signal of his presence. When they reached room 3B, Vanessa Green was already there. She stood by the bedside, speaking softly to the girls, a binder open on her lap. Vanessa wore a thick charcoal cardigan over a navy blouse, her hair tucked under a knitted hat. A woman of quiet command, she had the rare gift of balancing empathy with action. Her voice could calm a panicked child one moment and shut down a bureaucrat the next. When she saw Daniel, she rose. "I've been speaking to Chloe," she said. "Not much, just small things. She asked where Coda sleeps. Told her he sleeps next to you." That made her smile. Daniel nodded. "I need your help. I'm going to ask you to make a request for thermal imaging. I think I know where Rick Dalton might be hiding." Vanessa blinked, surprised. "Thermal satellite scans? That's not easy to get." "I don't need top-grade intel," Daniel said. "Just overlays from forestry drones or weather satellites. Anything that shows heat signatures in the pine stretch north of Route 70. He's a survivalist. No power, no signal, but he's not invisible." Vanessa gave a slow nod. "I know someone at the forestry department, Logan Teague. He's old school but owes me a favor. I'll call him now." As Vanessa stepped out to place the call, Chloe stirred slightly. Her eyes fluttered open, still distant but not as hollow. "Is Coda here?" she whispered. Coda stepped forward on his own. He rested his chin near the bed again, and Chloe smiled for the first time. Daniel crouched beside her. "Hey, sunshine. You remember anything else about the man who took your mom?" Chloe hesitated, then lifted her hand to her own cheek, tracing a line down her face. "He had this," she said. "A big cut, like a crack of lightning." Daniel swallowed. "Thank you, Chloe. That helps a lot." In the hallway, Vanessa returned. "Logan's uploading the last scan from 2 days ago. They were surveying deadfall risks from the storm. If there's a campfire or anything warm out there, we'll see it." Back at his desk, Daniel pulled up the incoming satellite data. Each frame scrolled past slowly infrared scans of the thick northern woods. Snow glowed a deep blue-black. Cold structures registered nothing. But then, near the south ridge line, a flicker, a blotch of red-orange in the middle of nowhere. He zoomed in. There it was, a faint heat signature near a small creek bend, too consistent to be an animal, too isolated for a hiker. He stood up, his pulse accelerating. Coda rose too. They had a lead. The sun barely lifted over the horizon, casting a dim silver glow through the overcast sky. Wind howled through the bare limbs of the pines, whipping the snow in sharp little flurries that stung the skin. The forest north of Asheville was unkind on a good day, but today it felt like it wanted something buried. Officer Daniel Foster stood outside the patrol SUV on the edge of a trailhead closed to the public. Tire chains had barely held on during the climb, and ice slicked every surface. His breath fogged out in front of him, and beside him, Coda was already straining at his lead, nose low, body taut like a drawn bow. The coordinates from the forestry satellite image had led them here, just southeast of South Fork Ridge. No roads, no cabins on record. If there was anything human out here, it wasn't supposed to be. Behind Daniel, 2 officers checked their gear. The first, Officer Joel Briggs, was a burly man in his late 40s with a barrel chest, weather-beaten skin, and graying temples. A veteran of mountain search and rescue, Briggs had seen what frostbite and desperation could do to people. His partner, Natalie Park, was younger, early 30s, Korean-American, compact and quick, her dark braid tucked under her knit cap. She had a reputation for being methodical, rarely raising her voice, but never missing a detail. "Radio's already spotty," Natalie said, testing her handset. "We get a mile deeper, we're blind. We go in now, we commit." Daniel gave a tight nod. "We follow Coda, stay alert, eyes up, no hero moves." Coda barked once, short and urgent, then lunged forward. Daniel barely had time to switch to a longer lead before the dog pulled them off the snowy trail and into the brush. Branches snapped underfoot, ice cracked beneath boots. The snowfall muted sound, but the creak of the forest canopy and the wind through frozen needles gave the place a sinister soundtrack. After 20 minutes, they came upon it, a structure, just as the satellite had hinted. Not a real house, but something between a shack and a bunker. The roof was half collapsed under snow weight, slanted like it had surrendered to the elements. The walls were patchwork old timber, some parts salvaged siding, and a tarp tacked over what must have once been a window. From a distance, it might pass for storm debris. Up close, it was clearly lived in. Smoke no longer rose from the stovepipe, but boot prints deep and recent marred the snow leading to the door. "Looks abandoned," Briggs muttered. "No," Daniel said. "Look at the ridgeline on the roof." All three of them turned their heads. Amid the thick layer of snow, a set of prints, smaller, human-trailed from one end of the roof to the other. As if someone had climbed up, maybe to adjust the tarp, maybe to scout from higher ground. Either way, someone had been here very recently. Coda circled the structure, tail straight, ears back. Then suddenly he stopped. Without waiting, he pawed at the base of the wooden front step, then shoved his muzzle into a narrow gap near the threshold. He let out a low, persistent whine, then scratched hard. Daniel dropped to one knee beside him. The planks were soft here, damp with meltwater, and something else streaked faintly dark. He pushed aside a patch of snow. There it was, a reddish-brown stain, partially frozen into the wood. "Blood," Natalie said quietly, "still fresh enough to smear." Briggs moved around to the side. "Back here, windows boarded, but the gaps show movement inside blankets, supplies. Someone's holed up in there." Daniel stood, chest tightening. He reached slowly for the concealed latch beneath the back of his belt and drew his sidearm. "We breach," he said. "Soft until we know more. Natalie, cover rear, Briggs with me." Coda stayed at Daniel's heel as they approached. At the door, he pawed once more, then sat, tense, waiting for command. Daniel knocked once. "Asheville PD, anyone inside, come out with your hands visible." No answer, just wind. Daniel exchanged a glance with Briggs, then pressed inward. The door creaked, then gave way. Inside, the air was warmer, thick with the sour tang of unwashed bodies and mold. Blankets were pinned along the walls to trap heat. A cot was shoved into the corner, and in the far end of the room sat a rusted stove still faintly warm. On the wall near the bed, scratched into the wood, was a name, Samantha. Daniel felt the hair on his arms rise. Coda pulled sharply toward the left corner of the room, toward a half-toppled dresser. Daniel moved with him, knelt, and pulled it aside. There, balled behind it like it had been kicked out of sight, was a blood-stained women's coat. Small, padded red wool, the zipper torn. Daniel lifted it gently. "Amanda's," he murmured. "Same coat as in the photo." Briggs swore under his breath. "So where the hell is she?" Natalie's voice crackled over radio, faint. "You guys hearing this?" Daniel responded. "Go ahead." "Found a second trail, east of your position. Smaller prints, someone running, not wearing boots." Daniel's blood went cold. She ran. Maybe broke free. Just then, Coda let out a low, haunting howl. He wasn't barking. He wasn't growling. It was the sound Daniel had only heard once before, from deep in a blizzard, when they found a collapsed shelter and the girl inside hadn't made it. Coda was grieving, or warning. Daniel dropped to his knee and pressed his forehead to Coda's. "We'll find her," he whispered. "We're not too late." The snow deepened as they descended from the cabin site, the wind pressing harder now, funneling down from the ridgelines in piercing gusts. The temperature had plummeted. Daniel could feel the bite even beneath his thermal jacket, every breath a needle of cold threading into his lungs. Coda walked ahead, his paws silent over the powder, tail low but alert. He paused every few steps to sniff the air, his amber eyes narrowed against the wind. Though Daniel hadn't said it aloud, both he and Coda understood the same thing. Amanda Carter had been here, and she was likely still alive, but not for long. Back at the station, the heat felt almost unreal. The emergency generator kicked on sporadically, giving the hallways a low rumble like distant thunder. In the dimmed light of the interview room, Clara stirred on the cot. Vanessa Green sat by her side, rubbing the girl's back with slow, steady motions. Vanessa had changed out of her outdoor coat, revealing a navy wool turtleneck and slacks, her signature winter uniform. She looked tired but composed, her glasses low on her nose as she jotted something into her case file. She had worked child trauma for over a decade, but watching these twins flinch at every sound had left even her shaken. As Clara turned in her sleep, she mumbled something, barely above a whisper. "Mommy told us to run. She said she'd keep him busy." Vanessa's pen stilled. She reached out, gently adjusted the blanket around Clara, and made a note. Then she stepped quietly into the hallway, where Daniel had just returned, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Clara spoke in her sleep," Vanessa said, her voice hushed. "Amanda stayed behind to give the girls time to escape. They didn't run by accident. It was her plan." Daniel exhaled sharply. She knew he'd snap. Vanessa nodded once. She must have stalled him somehow, maybe pretended to cooperate. Daniel rubbed his hands together, warming them. "We're out of time." Inside the briefing room, Daniel pulled up the latest batch of data from forestry surveillance, this time a composite of 3 different weather drone flyovers. Most were outdated, but one from 48 hours ago showed something. Just east of the ridge where the shack had been, a heat bloom had shifted. What had been a single concentrated source now showed 2 separate points, one small and dim, one brighter and mobile moving east, down toward a frozen gorge near South Fork. "Rick's on the move," Daniel muttered, and he took her with him. Standing beside him was Detective Mia Delgado, a compact woman in her early 40s with coffee-dark skin, a long trench coat, and sharp, analytical eyes. Mia had transferred from Charlotte a year prior and brought with her a no-nonsense attitude. She was blunt, efficient, and the only one on the force who could make Daniel smile on a bad day, mostly because she never let him sulk. "South Fork?" she asked, peering over his shoulder. "That place is ice, rock, and God's bad mood. He's trying to vanish." Daniel tapped the screen. "He won't get far if he's dragging someone through that terrain." "Unless he plans to make her vanish before he does," Mia said grimly. Daniel didn't reply. He clicked into the most recent infrared scan and marked the coordinates on a topographic map. The area was a maze of steep gullies, frozen creeks, and old mining paths. Some collapsed, some just forgotten. It would take hours to search on foot. Too long. He turned to Coda, who sat poised by the exit, tail sweeping once across the floor. "Coda," Daniel said, crouching beside the dog. "You ready to earn your badge again?" The shepherd licked his nose, eyes locked on Daniel's face. 10 minutes later, Daniel, Mia, and 2 members of the Forest Response Unit, Eric Holloway and Tasha Bloom, were packed and mounted on snowmobiles. Eric was a lean man in his early 50s, tall and long-limbed, with a deep Appalachian accent and a gaze that scanned the tree lines like he was born in them. Tasha, barely 30, was built like a runner, with a strong jaw and freckles that stood out starkly against her pale skin. Both had spent years navigating these hills. Daniel brought up the rear with Coda riding beside him in a modified harness strapped to the rear of his snowmobile. As they tore through the snow-packed trail, he checked their heading every few minutes, eyes darting between GPS and horizon. As the sun dipped lower, the forest thickened, and snowflakes fell in heavier clumps. Just beyond a sharp bend near a stream, Coda growled low in his throat. Daniel slowed. "What is it, boy?" he asked, eyes scanning. Coda leapt off the back and bounded into the woods. Daniel followed. Within moments, they came upon an old root cellar, half collapsed, mostly buried by snow. The door had been crudely reinforced with rocks, and a canvas tarp was pinned across its entrance with wooden stakes. Coda sniffed near a section of trampled snow, then stopped abruptly. His ears shot up. He sniffed again, slow, deliberate. Daniel crouched and peeled back the tarp. Inside, the air reeked of sweat, mold, and iron. Clinging to a support beam near the rear wall was a strip of fabric dark red wool, Amanda's coat. Daniel swore under his breath and turned to the team. They were here, not long ago. Tasha checked the ground. Fresh footprints, size 12 or so, pacing back and forth. The smaller ones barefoot, headed east, still bleeding. Daniel's voice dropped. "We're right behind them." He turned back to Coda. "Find her, boy. Bring us home." The wind had sharpened. As the search team crossed a frozen ravine just below the South Fork cliffs, the temperature plunged below 22 degrees, biting through even the thickest gloves. Every breath Daniel took turned to frost on his beard. The pine trees around them creaked ominously in the bitter wind, and snow whipped across the clearing like ghosts trying to speak. Ahead, Coda stopped. The German shepherd stood still, ears rigid, nose tilted slightly to the air. Then he growled a low, guttural sound that sent adrenaline surging through Daniel's chest. The dog's body shifted, muscles taut, tail frozen like a flag in still wind. "There," Daniel said, pointing toward a half-concealed structure tucked behind a curtain of fallen branches and snow-draped scrub oak. "That's not natural cover." The structure looked like a twisted mixture of survivalist ingenuity and desperation. Wooden pallets, salvaged tarps, sheet metal, and branches had been fused together to form a crude shelter. The entrance was no more than a slit in heavy canvas pinned between logs. A small plume of warmth barely visible escaped through a crude ventilation pipe in the back, the only sign of life. Daniel gave a silent hand signal to the others. Mia Delgado flanked left, eyes scanning through her rifle's thermal scope. Briggs moved to the right, sidearm drawn low. Tasha stayed back, covering the exit paths. Coda waited, coiled like a spring. And then, a sound. Faint, choked, a muffled moan. Coda reacted instantly. No command needed. He bolted forward, snow exploding around him. He slipped under the hanging canvas and vanished into the dark. "Coda!" Daniel shouted, then ran forward. He dove through the same opening and hit the packed dirt floor hard. The interior was dimly lit by a dying lantern. The air was dense, damp, cold, metallic. In the far corner, a figure lay crumpled against the wall. Amanda. Her hands were tied behind her back with nylon rope. Her ankles were bound as well, purple with bruising. A strip of fabric was jammed in her mouth, her cheeks soaked in tears. Her coat was gone, replaced with a dirty blanket half thrown over her shoulders. She looked up at Daniel with wild, desperate eyes, and then past him as Coda lunged. The dog collided with a figure who had been crouched in the shadows. Rick Dalton. The man was gaunt from weeks of isolation, his dirty blonde hair matted and frozen at the edges. His eyes were wild and bloodshot, teeth bared like an animal. In his right hand was a hunting knife, curved and rusted, raised midair. But Coda's weight hit him before it could fall. The shepherd latched onto Rick's wrist with crushing force, dragging him backward as he screamed. Daniel was already moving, crossing the space in seconds. He yanked Amanda away from the fight, placing his body between her and the chaos. Rick screamed and thrashed. "You don't get to take her!" he bellowed, his voice cracking. "I told her no one would find her! I told her!" Briggs and Mia entered seconds later. Mia aimed her weapon squarely at Rick's head. "Don't move," she snapped. "Let the dog finish what the courts didn't." Daniel raised a hand toward Coda. "Out. Now." Coda obeyed instantly, teeth releasing. He backed away, blood on his muzzle, breath steaming in the cold air. Rick fell into the snow, clutching his shredded forearm. His face contorted, not just in pain, but rage. "You don't understand," he panted, writhing. "She lied to me, said she loved me, said we were a family." "You beat her," Daniel growled. "You beat the kids." "I was fixing them," Rick shouted. "She turned them against me." Daniel didn't respond. He holstered his sidearm, walked forward, and with Briggs's help slammed Rick face down into the snow. The handcuffs clicked with finality. "You're done," Daniel said coldly. Behind them, Amanda had collapsed to her knees. Her chest heaved in sobs she could no longer hold back. She blinked up at Coda, who approached cautiously. When the shepherd nudged his head under her hand, she broke completely. "You found me," she whispered. "You really found me." Mia knelt beside her, cutting the rope binding her wrists. "You're safe now," she said. "He won't touch you again." Amanda curled her arms around Coda's neck. "I thought I was going to die in here," she said, her voice breaking. "I told the girls to run. I told them to find someone kind, someone with a dog." Daniel helped her to her feet, wrapping her in an emergency blanket. Her face was pale and gaunt, lips cracked, but her spirit, though battered, was not broken. She leaned heavily into his side. Outside the shelter, snow continued to fall, gently now, as if the storm itself had exhaled. Within the hour, Rick was strapped to a stretcher under guard. Amanda was stabilized and loaded into the second snowmobile unit. Coda refused to leave her side, sitting beside the sled with unflinching focus as if guarding a queen. Before departure, Amanda gripped Daniel's wrist. Her eyes were red, but clear. "Did they make it?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "They're safe. Clara and Chloe. They're waiting." Amanda's mouth trembled into a smile as the wind began to rise again, this time quieter, softer. The corridors of Asheville General were painted in soft shades of blue and green, colors chosen by architects to soothe nerves. But on this particular morning, they did little to still the tension in room 214. The hospital was quiet, muffled by the thick snowfall still falling steadily outside the windows. The storm had begun to fade, but its bitter cold remained, clinging to the town like a bruise. In the corner of the room, Daniel Foster stood motionless, his arms folded tightly across his chest, his back pressed against the wall. Amanda Carter lay in the hospital bed, her body wrapped in layers of warmed blankets. Her face was pale, her lips cracked from dehydration, but she was breathing steadily now. Her right wrist was splinted, held up in a foam sling, the break from her struggle with Rick now stabilized. A line of bruises traced the curve of her jaw, and there were scratches on her neck. But none of those details mattered when she opened her eyes and saw Daniel standing there. For a moment her gaze was unfocused, her mind trying to piece together where she was. Then, like the sun emerging from a long eclipse, understanding dawned. She inhaled sharply and reached out with her free hand, trembling. Daniel stepped forward, gently taking her fingers in his own. "Are they alive?" Amanda asked. Her voice was raspy, barely more than breath. "The girls... Please tell me." Daniel nodded, words catching in his throat. "They're safe. Clara and Chloe are here. They're waiting for you." Amanda's chest rose and fell in a shuddering sob. "He told me. He said no one was coming. That you wouldn't find me." Her hand tightened in his. "But you did." "I wasn't the only one," Daniel said quietly, glancing down. Coda lay curled at the foot of the bed, head resting between his outstretched paws. He had refused to leave Amanda's side since they arrived, and even now his amber eyes remained alert, watching her every move with a quiet, unwavering focus. His thick black and tan fur was damp in spots where the snow had melted, but he didn't seem to notice or care. Amanda blinked down at him. "Coda," she whispered, then turned back to Daniel. "He saved me." Daniel gave a faint smile. He always finds the ones who are still fighting. Outside the room, footsteps approached. Vanessa Green entered quietly, guiding Clara and Chloe by the hand. Both girls were bundled in hospital robes now, their red dresses finally discarded. Their hair was brushed but still tangled at the ends, and their eyes, though cleaner, were rimmed red with tears. Vanessa, ever gentle, crouched beside them at the threshold. "Do you want to go in, sweethearts? Mommy's awake." Chloe hesitated, her small hands clenched tightly at her sides. Clara nodded first, eyes locked on the shape in the bed. Then slowly the twins stepped inside. Amanda gasped when she saw them. Tears spilled freely now as she tried to sit up, grimacing from the pain in her arm. Clara reached the bed first, followed by Chloe. They climbed up carefully, one on each side, and leaned into their mother's arms. Amanda pulled them close with her good hand, burying her face in their hair, holding them like she might never get another chance. No words were spoken. Only the sound of quiet sobbing and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor filled the room. Daniel turned away slightly, blinking hard. His throat tightened, and without thinking, he ran a hand over his face. For years he had carried the weight of Fallujah, of losing his wife, of burying his unborn son's name with silence. But standing here now, watching a family begin to stitch itself back together, something gave way inside him. He didn't even realize he was crying until the tear fell onto the badge pinned at his chest. Mia Delgado entered the room a moment later, carrying a paper cup of hospital coffee and a file folder. She took one look at Daniel and paused. Mia rarely intruded on moments of emotion. Her job was about facts, reports, legal forms, but she understood enough to keep her voice low. "She'll recover," she said, handing Daniel the folder. "Fracture's clean, lungs are clear, bruising will fade. Doctors say with rest and nutrition, she'll be okay." Daniel took the folder without a word. "She won't press charges," Mia added with a faint smile. "She wants to, desperately. She just said she wants to do it in person, in court, for the girls. Daniel nodded. Good. Vanessa leaned against the doorway, watching the reunion. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes shimmered. I've seen a lot of children cry, she said softly. But the silence of relief, that's something else. Daniel stepped forward one last time, crouching beside the bed. Amanda looked up at him with tired but grateful eyes. Chloe and Clara clung to her still, neither one willing to let go. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out, a laminated badge, slightly scratched at the corners. It had the department's insignia on one side, and on the back, a small metal tag that read, Honorary K9, Coda. Amanda smiled as Daniel clipped it onto the edge of the blanket near Coda's head. He earned it, Daniel said. Coda, hearing his name, lifted his head and looked around, then let out a small, satisfied huff before resting again. Outside, the snow finally stopped, the clouds began to part, and for the first time in days, light returned to Asheville. March came slowly to Willow Creek, each sunrise coaxing a few more inches of hardened snow into streams that rushed along the curbs. The icicles that once hung like frozen daggers from rooftops now dripped rhythmically, marking the quiet return of life to the small mountain town. The bitter winds had softened, replaced by the cool kiss of early spring. But inside a rented white cottage 2 blocks from the police station, warmth had returned far earlier than outside. Amanda Reese stood by the window, her right arm still in a soft sling, though healing steadily. Her once gaunt cheeks had started to fill out, and her dark chestnut hair, which had fallen limp during her weeks of recovery, now held a healthy sheen as it draped gently over her shoulders. She wore a light blue knit sweater and a pair of black slacks, simple but clean. There was still a quiet tremor in her voice when startled, and sometimes the shadows beneath her hazel eyes deepened with sudden memory. But the way she now moved, slow but deliberate, protective yet open, told a story of someone determined to heal, not only for herself, but for the 2 souls who giggled softly behind her. Emma and Chloe were curled up on a second-hand rug by the fireplace, coloring in silence, though their eyes frequently flicked up toward their mother, as if checking that she was truly still there. The twins had gained some weight since the snowstorm. Their skin no longer had that translucent paleness of starvation. Chloe had a new habit of humming when she drew, while Emma took to pressing her hand against Amanda's back whenever she stood close, as if anchoring her in place. Both girls still wore matching pink leggings and oversized wool cardigans donated by neighbors, but Amanda had made sure to sew on tiny name patches, one with a small butterfly, the other with a star. Daniel Foster knocked lightly on the open door before stepping in, holding a large envelope under one arm and a warm box of pastries in the other. He looked less weathered these days. The permanent furrow between his brows had softened slightly, and he'd taken to smiling, albeit awkwardly, when the girls were around. At 39, his sandy blonde hair was peppered with early gray, and he still walked with a soldier's posture, alert yet tired. But that day, as the spring light spilled over his dark blue police jacket, he looked like a man who had begun to believe in beginnings again. Trailing behind him was Coda, tail wagging gently, his black and rust fur gleaming with fresh grooming. The scar on his right side had faded to a thin silver line beneath the fur, barely visible now. He moved with the confident grace of a seasoned canine, but greeted the girls with a gentleness that betrayed his training. He padded straight to them, pressing his nose to Chloe's hand, then sat between them with a low, satisfied chuff. Amanda smiled. He knows where his people are. Daniel chuckled, setting the pastries on the kitchen counter. He's become something of a celebrity. You'll see. He handed her the envelope. Inside was a glossy certificate and a laminated photo of Coda standing on the steps of City Hall, flanked by officers. The headline read, Willow Creek honors Canine Coda as Hero of the Year. Amanda's breath caught. They really gave him a medal? He earned it, Daniel said. Half the town showed up. The mayor's daughter called him a snow angel. It stuck. As if on cue, Chloe leaned forward and wrapped her arms around Coda's thick neck, burying her face in his fur. You are our angel, she whispered. Emma crawled over to the coffee table, tugged on Daniel's sleeve, and handed him a folded piece of construction paper. Inside, drawn in colorful crayon, were 3 stick figures, Amanda, Chloe, and Emma standing beside Daniel and Coda. Above it, in neat kindergarten scrawl, You and Coda are the reason we still have Mommy. Daniel swallowed hard and looked away briefly before blinking the burn out of his eyes. He cleared his throat. I've been thinking. I found a place 2 houses down. Smaller than I'd like, but the backyard is fenced. Good for Coda. Amanda tilted her head. That's close. I'd like to be around, just in case. Not as a cop, as, someone who sticks. Amanda nodded slowly, her voice soft. We've had enough people who leave. Later that evening, as the sky turned amber and the last patches of snow shrank into memory, the family sat out on the small porch wrapped in donated blankets. Coda lay at their feet, ears twitching at distant birdsong. Amanda sipped tea. The twins leaned against her shoulders, warm and safe. Daniel sat on the porch steps, watching them as if afraid to blink and break the moment. Somewhere nearby, wind chimes sang faintly. The girls had started school again. Amanda now worked part-time at the town library, a quiet job she loved, one that let her be near her daughters. Vanessa Green still visited once a week, not out of protocol anymore, but as a friend. Clara and Emma had made a new friend named Maisie and invited her over for a drawing playdate next week. Coda had taken to lying by the classroom window when the girls were in school, as if guarding them even from afar. And Daniel? Daniel had not spoken to his own father in 10 years before meeting Amanda. But now, he was calling him. He wasn't sure what he would say, only that he wanted to stop the cycle. He wanted the girls to see that even men who had seen too much darkness could choose to stay in the light. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. Sometimes they come on 4 legs, with quiet eyes and a heart that refuses to give up. In a world frozen by fear and silence, it was a mother's love, a child's courage, a dog's loyalty, and one man's choice to listen that melted the snow. This story reminds us, even in the coldest moments, God is near, working through the kindness of strangers, the strength of the innocent, and the loyalty of those who never leave. Maybe you've been Coda to someone, or maybe today you're still waiting for your Daniel, but don't lose hope. Keep praying, keep believing, and if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that miracles still happen, not always in loud ways, but in small, steady steps across the snow. Drop an amen in the comments if you believe in second chances. Tag a friend who needs to hear this. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and may God bless you and your family wherever you are. You were not left behind. He sees you. He's coming.